If you clicked on this video, you've most probably already heard of the song 佳人 by Lexie Liu, which can also be translated to beauty in English. There's no need to be worried if you do not understand or speak Mandarin, because in this video we will be diving into greater details on all the hidden lyrical and visual metaphors, as well as the cultural references that has been very intricately interwoven into the song's lyrics and the music video itself. This explanation will be broken into three main segments, namely the lyricism, visual aesthetics, as well as the characters portrayed within the music video. Before we dive in, it is first important for us to know the structural breakdown of the song as the following. To avoid repetition, we will look specifically into these 5 different sections in the analysis of the lyricism of this song. Just less than 10 seconds into the beginning of the song, Lexie immediately captures the listener's attention with the hook of the song, which is also the chorus. She begins by telling Chinese girls to cut off their qipaos, draping onto the floor. Qipao is indisputably one of the most defining visual representations of Mandarin culture in contemporary society, having gone through multiple transformations over the course of history. In the past, Qipao took on a full coverage, loose-fitting, and a more shapeless A-line form. However, after the overthrow of the Qing dynasty during the Republican era in China between 1912 to 1928, the rise in female liberation movements and the influx of Western ideas sparked off modifications to the style of qipaos into beautiful, form-fitting outfits. These clothing served as a form of political expression and activism during a time where women did not have a voice, and subsequent alterations to the style, accentuating the female body shape, were a sign of embraced femininity and increased desire and assertiveness in expressing their own individuality. Relating the history of qipao to the song, when Lexie tells Chinese girls to boss it up and cut off their lengthy qipaos, she's actively telling them to rebel against the conservative views on how a woman should dress, just like the brave women who protested for female liberation during the Republican era and embraced their own version of dressing however they wish that makes them feel more comfortable. The second line of the chorus translates to, "I don't want to see red lanterns hung high at my door anymore." Now, this line directly references the 1991 film Raise the Red Lantern, also known as 大红灯笼高高挂, directed by Zhang yimou. This film is highly emblematic of women's lives in the warlord era of the Republic of China set in the 1920s. The oppression of women in the film under a suffocating patriarchal system situated in the confines of a house is tragically and beautifully presented through this film, which I highly recommend watching. It is considered one of the best films of the 90s decade and definitely a must-watch in the history of Chinese cinema. So when Lexie sings this line in chorus, she's conveying her defiance and contempt against any trace of subservience among Chinese women. In terms of the visual aesthetics, other than the evident use of red lanterns in almost every corner of the music video, the set also directly mimics various scenes in the film Raise the Red Lantern, where we see Lexie dolling up herself in preparation to be sent for marriage, with the rickshaw pullers holding up red lanterns as they transport her in the dark. Leading into the post-chorus, this is where Lexie offers a contrasting perspective where she sings this. In contrast to the preceding chorus where Lexie unyieldingly conveys her aversion towards the conservative attire imposed on Chinese women, here she expresses her nonchalant attitude where even if a girl is compelled to wear a piece of clothing that symbolizes restriction on women's freedom, she's still fully capable of taking care of herself and overcoming hurdles in her life. In essence, she is implying that a woman's strength and grit will not be hampered despite society's imposed expectations on her. Moving on to the 2 verses in the song. For the second half of verse 1 and almost the entirety of verse 2, Lexie's descent towards a conventional perception of the role of women only becomes even more apparent. What is even more impressive is that she manages to shapeshift between 2 different languages, English and Mandarin, without impeding on the coherency of the theme on female empowerment that she is drilling into the listeners' minds. In the first line of verse 2, Lexie recites a line from a poem written by Li Bai, one of the most renowned poets in the history of Chinese poetry. The poem is titled 长相思, which can also be translated to endless yearning. Incorporating this line from the poem into verse 2 alludes towards Lexie describing herself as a beauty who is out of reach, independent, and has a mind of her own, which is also supported in the subsequent lines that she sings. It is pretty self-explanatory from these lyrics that Lexie is owning her non-compliance, where she openly states her stance and implied that her name is so reputable across the country now that she does not need to care about anyone else's wants or needs from her. Then comes the bridge of the song. The bridge consists of 2 lines that references a song and a poem, both from ancient Chinese history. The first line where she sings, Lexie quotes a line from a quatrain by Cao Zhi, a poet who was greatly revered for his literary intelligence and talent. The poem that she quotes, however, was written at a time where the poet Cao Zhi was lamenting over his constrained ability to fulfill his political ambitions and unleash his potential and prowess at a larger spotlight in court affairs. He was a son of Cao, an eminent ruler and a central historical figure of Imperial China. However, Cao Zhi was unable to fulfill his ambitions due to jealousy and suppression from his brother Cao Pi, who ascended to the throne as a ruler after his father died. In the second line of the bridge, this is actually a line extracted from a song with almost the same name written by an ancient Chinese court musician, Li Yan Nian, when the Han dynasty was under Emperor Wu's reign. Combining the first line of these 2 different poems in the bridge of a song, we have these. Tying into the narrative of the film Raise the Red Lantern, as well as the context and the predicament behind the 6-part quatrain that Cao Zhi wrote, referenced by Lexie in the bridge, we can see how Lexie draws parallels between the lives of the women depicted in the film itself, as well as the distress of an underappreciated poet, all of whom suffered in their lives under the control of others. In the case of Raise the Red Lantern, at a time in society where polygyny was the norm, the lives and the treatments that the wives and the concubines received were all under the mercy of the wealthy husband, who is also the master of the house. Similar to how the poets Li Yan Nian and Cao Zhi describes the remarkable appearances of a beauty from the north and another from the south, all women depicted in the film were once a charm to the master's heart, each with their own distinct characteristics and charisma, which also correlates to the literal meanings of the bridge sung by Lexie. However, due to the patriarchal nature of society and the conservative views on women during the time setting of the film, the women's distinctive skills and abilities all became irrelevant in the face of an oppressive system in place, pitting themselves against each other, all for the attention and reward from a man whom they were obliged to please. Deference in yielding to the figure of authority, in this case a man, is far more important than be it being the most beautiful woman in the world that a man can ever dream of, or being the best at giving massages, the most prolific opera singer, or the most educated wife out of all. As long as they show any sign of unhappiness and disobedience, they are bound to lose favorability from the master or face even worse consequences. The similarity between the context of the poem written by the poet Cao Zhi, bemoaning over his underappreciated competence due to his lack of autonomy from the imposed restrictions on him by others, and the tragic lives of the women as prisoners in a house depicted in the film Raise the Red Lantern, are most definitely not coincidental. The poems and various pivotal scenes from the film, interlaced within Lexie's lyricism, as well as the aesthetics of the music video, serve as the perfect antithesis to the overarching message that Lexie is driving across. She is boldly standing her ground and declaring to everyone that in essence, Chinese women, or women in general, should rightfully have complete ownership to the autonomy of their lives, and that they are perfectly capable of empowering themselves by breaking free from the shackles of societal expectations on them. Now that we have done a deeper dive into the lyricism of the song, it is time for us to examine the visuals and the underlying metaphorical expressions in the music video. Let us begin with the opening scene. This opening frame itself might seem like any other intro into a music video, however, there are actually a lot more loaded metaphorical significance behind the production setting. Immediately, we see the camera closing up on the subject, Lexie, who is positioned right in the center of the frame, seated furthest from the door of what seems like a private room in a restaurant. This imagery directly challenges the knowledge of people who are well versed with Chinese traditional practices during formal banquet dinings, as usually the seat of the most notable guest or the most important person at a table in formal Chinese dining etiquettes sits the furthest from the door or the entrance, back facing a wall and right in the middle as a sign of honor to the individual. The host or the other less important guests will be seated nearer to the entrance as the people who are communicating the orders directly with the waiters or waitresses. We know that Lexie is seated furthest from the door simply by looking at the construction of the set during the scene. This gathering occurs within an enclosed space, with walls on all sides, and even Lexie herself is seated back facing a wall. This is also evident towards the end of the video, where Lexie leaves the scene from where the camera was positioned in the opening frame of the intro, which is also the entrance of this particular private room that everyone else is situated in as well. Within the first 10 seconds of the video, even before the song begins, the visual imagery opposes the conventional perception on the role and social hierarchy of women in society, as it is very uncommon for a woman to be seated at the most important seat in a social gathering like this, let alone a young woman like Lexie. Also notice how despite her seated in the most important seating at the gathering, none of the other diners at the table seem to care about her presence. She looks bored and neglected by the rest when no one approaches her or bothers to have a conversation with her. Again, this seems to allude to the perception that a young woman like her does not really have her voice or power valued by others, despite holding the most important position at this social gathering supposedly. Now, in comparison to the outro, as the song ends, the music video cuts back to the same modern setting as the intro, where everyone around her are no longer frozen and is behaving as how normally one would find at a social gathering, talking and eating. This is where we see the contrast with the intro. Notice how as Lexie stands up abruptly, everyone around her immediately stop what they were doing and all look at her intently, even as she walks out of the room. We see everyone else's gaze follow her figure as she slowly makes her way out of the frame. It is only when she's completely out of frame that everyone else left at the table resumes back to what they were doing before, eating and talking with each other. The outro thus presents a juxtaposition and realization for the audience in comparison to the intro, where we are provided with a false sense of influence that a young woman like Lexie can hold, which however unfortunately is not enough for others to care or take her seriously. Unlike conventional practices within traditional Chinese culture, where the guest of honor is usually a man or a much more experienced or older person in terms of seniority, this simple transition in an outro reinforces the importance of Lexie at this particular social setting, where the actions and presence of a young woman like her can still matter significantly and is able to garner everyone else's attention or even dictate how they behave around her. This subtle progression from the intro to the outro ties in with the overall theme on female empowerment neatly, with zero spoken dialogue and is purely conveyed through sequences of moving pictures. Last but not least, let us touch on the multiple personas that Lexie took on from the beginning of the video to the end. In the intro, we see Lexie dressed in modern fashion, wearing a Kappa branded cropped white tank top and a skirt. There are 3 outfits worn by Lexie in this video, which promotes Kappa's brand, and the other 2 are seen later in the video as the song progresses. There's not much I can interpret from this, or at least that's what I think, other than the apparent product placement of Kappa's brand, who's most likely the main sponsor for the production of this music video, and the intentional use of white and red outfits to be consistent with the rest of the color palette. When I was researching on this video, I noticed online that there are multiple sites which translates this song's Mandarin title to Kappa Girl in English, and this is utterly disappointing because it completely misses the message of this entire song. Just because the music video is financially backed by the Kappa brand and Kappa Girl appears in one line of the lyrics does not mean that it is the right English translation for the title of this music video. Anyways, I digress. Moving on to the second persona that Lexie embodies. From the shape of the mic, the golden qipao that she's wearing, as well as her hairstyle, she reminds us of the famous 时代曲 singers from the 1920s to the 40s, singing in jazz clubs who were probably the earliest versions of mandopop stars in the history of Chinese music. In the third persona, we see Lexie as a soon-to-be bride applying her makeup, while the other man waits for her outside, and she's eventually carried across the street accompanied by a group of rickshaw pullers and servants. The fourth persona is the second outfit from the product placement effort between Kappa and Lexie's brand, where Lexie is seen wearing a cropped red Kappa zip-on and a pair of trousers. Then comes the fifth persona that Lexie embodies. Now this is where things gets interesting because the fifth persona is a huge contrast from the previous 4. Just from the fact that she's wearing full black distinguishes this fit from the main colors of white, gold, and red found in the previous 4. We see her in what seems like the top of a black qipao, paired with black gloves on and a black corset. This fit of course has a more modern spin on the traditional qipao, however the most interesting thing about this fit is actually the hat. Asian conical hats, dou li, also known as coolie hats or rice hats, are historically very commonly worn by the ordinary masses, who were mostly peasants as protection from the sun and rain when they were working in their fields or plantations. However, what's interesting about the conical hat that Lexie is wearing is of course the color of the hat. It is not the usual color of bamboos and straw hats, which is usually beige or green. Instead, it is tinted black, which also reminds us of the many Chinese historical dramas or Chinese films that depict narratives set in historical times, where conical hats are also frequently worn by Chinese swordsmen, wuxia heroes, or sometimes assassins as well. Wearing conical hats allows such characters to blend in more easily with the masses when disguising or concealing their faces, true identity and ability in various narratives. The sixth persona that we see is none other than the third and last product placement in the video, an outfit with the red cropped pullover and white kappa joggers. In the last outfit worn by Lexie as she runs away from the servants all looking at her, we see her in a black long-sleeved loose blouse, a black corset, much baggier and looser pants, and the same conical hat worn in her previous outfit. We also see her as a solo individual standing against the rest, possibly implying that her force as an individual is strong enough to go against anyone regardless of her being outnumbered. This full body shot of her outfit allows one to draw similarities with the type of zhang ku, more specifically ku zhe, which is one of the most common traditional styles of Chinese clothing in the early medieval periods of China. It was a popular form of clothing worn by both genders, consisting of a long cross-collared upper garment, either waist or knee length, tied with a belt, sash, or ribbon. Full trousers with white bottoms or slightly tempered cuffs were worn underneath the upper garment, and this was a common attire among the masses, as well as military members and civil officials during Wei, Jin, northern and southern dynasties. Sometimes the trousers were bounded with cords below the knees to increase ease of movements when horseback riding or when on military duty. Of course, the stylist definitely made alterations with modern twists to the overall look, where the upper garment is not cross-collared at all. They also replaced traditional belts, sashes, or ribbons tied at the waist with a black corset, modified the lengths of the upper garment, and played with the layering of different fabrics on top of the black trousers underneath. The intentional use of black upper garment, matched with a conical hat, presents Lexie as a mysterious and almost deadly character that can be likened to a soldier, swordsman, or even an assassin. In summary, excluding the outfits worn intentionally for product placement by Lexie, we see a progression of the personas portrayed by her from more traditionally feminine to more gender-neutral and non-conforming looks. Again, a subtle detail that ties in with the overall message of the song on female empowerment. A girl can be anything in her own right, regardless of how history has written its roles for women.